Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, it's difficult to stand here today and listen to someone spend half of a contribution talking about something that they thought was going to happen that never happened, but yet they are relying on that to blame this side for talking about something that never happened. So I could only say that that presentation by the Minister of Trade, and I'm so disappointed because I usually find some good content coming out of her presentations. I would say that she has been one of the more reasonable. It's not hard to stand out in that crowd, but she usually stands out as having a bit of a more reasonable contribution. But to spend half of your contribution talking about the partnership campaigning on Axi tax, bringing a bill that never saw the light of day except being laid in the parliament, which took up, 2 seconds of parliament, 2 minutes of parliamentary time. It never went to a debate to reintroduce any tax. In 2013, I think delivering the budget speech, the minister talked about reviewing the system of taxation. And in 2015, saying that no property tax will be collected by the partnership government. Yeah. That is what they have come here to rely on today to defend the indefensible. Delusional. This had to be the most delusional presentation I have ever heard in my life. I want to quote, and I would tell them that I find no one better to quote than the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, in 2009, when he said, "Stop taking your own advice that nobody is annoyed." Stop taking your own advice that nobody is annoyed, because it is the Prime Minister. And I heard the use of words like hypocrisy and talking out the two sides of your mouth and all kind of things. Who has been more hypocritic when it comes to property tax than the leader of their government? Nobody opposed property tax more strongly and vociferously in 2009 than the member for Diego Martin West, who is now the Prime Minister. Axi tax did not do as much damage to the Manning administration as did the member for Diego Martin West, who vociferously opposed it. And I want to make it clear, just as the Minister of Trade wants it to be recorded for the Hansard and for all of posterity, I want to put on the record, not 1 red cent of property tax was collected by the People's Partnership Administration. And you know why that is? The reason for that, and I had intended to deal with this later on in my presentation, but I will deal with it now since it seems to be the only thing that this government is grasping at. The reason for that is because after the announcement was made that the government would be looking again at, I think that was in the 2014 budget statement, the Minister of Finance, he said he would be looking at the system, and yes, he said looking at reintroducing industrial first and then commercial. And at least even when we were having the discussion, we were going to people's homes last. We were going to people's homes last, even when the discussion was first put forward in the budget statement. We weren't looking to come inside people's house first and foremost to drop taxes on them. Minister Hawaii said that he had proposed looking at an industrial tax, a commercial tax, and reverting to the land and building tax regime pre-2009, the one that members of this house has already spoken about, that nobody complained about before 2009. But by the time we took the time to have consultation, because that's what a government does. A government that listens, consults. And I can quote for you from Newsday article dated Monday, 24th of August 2015, in responding to the outlandish claims, the same kind of outlandish, like they haven't learned anything or to do anything in 10 years except to come here and make outlandish claims. Because in response to the outlandish claims made by the then PNM opposition, Minister Hawaii made a statement and said, Dr. Rowley quoted from a Hansard of the 9th of September 2013, but has not taken time to check on the status of this matter at the ministry. I have said categorically the cabinet has not considered this matter, nor has the matter been brought to cabinet for consideration at any time in the last 2 years. He said this was after my statement in 2013. He said the issue was not taken forward because government took on board the feedback received in those consultations, that we should consider carefully the tax burden on individuals and businesses and the effect it could have on new investment, and 2, that the process of implementation will be long and drawn out and will not provide immediate cash flow benefit to the Treasury. The fact of the matter is that Minister Hawaii refuted in 2015 that there was any plan then and there was any plan now and that any steps had been taken to bring property tax. So stop listening to your own delusions, stop taking your own advice, and stop trying to peddle untruths to the people of this country to make them believe that the People's Partnership Administration at any point in time took any steps towards reintroducing property tax on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We do not support property tax now. We did not support it in 2009, and we took absolutely no steps to do so between 2010 and 2015. Those are the facts. And we listened even when proposals were thrown. That's what a government does. You propose things, you consult, and you make a decision. We made a decision to not pursue property tax, and that is the decision that if you were a caring government, if you understood the economic realities facing this country right now, that is the decision that you would have made. Mr. Vice President, we are here to debate some amendments today, and it's funny that the minister could talk about making political decisions, because what they have done by coming here to reduce this tax rate from 3% to 2% is a political decision, because they are facing an election and they think they could mamagai the population by saying, well, okay, we hear you, we know that so we'll drop the tax rate by 1%. I am coming here today to tell you that that will not fool anybody. Because the problem is not with 1%, 2%, 3%, or 0.5%. It is on a flawed process. And you could drop it to 0.001%. It will not change the fact that the process of valuations carried out by the Valuations Division of the Ministry of Finance is fraught with inconsistencies. They are fraught with inconsistencies. And until you press pause and you fix those matters, no rate of taxation in this country will make any sense to the people upon whom you are trying to impose this tax at this point in time. Mr. Vice President, one of the reasons, and I hear that, and I'm responding directly to what the minister says about how necessary it is and why would people be opposed to it and so on, and everybody paying their taxes abroad, and they seem to think that they know everybody business on this side who own property where. Well, let me say it for the record, I own no property other than the one I live in. Which technically Republic Bank owns it, and they allow me to live in it because I pay them every month. And secondly, I don't even own any building that is rented. I don't even own an interest in a company for a building that is rented. I certainly do not own any property outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So I will just put that on the record. So I am speaking as the average citizen of Trinidad and Tobago who would have taken a mortgage to buy a property, who continues to pay that mortgage today, who would have paid stamp duty to the government when I bought that property, who would have paid stamp duty as well on the mortgage document that I had to pay. And I am like the average citizen of this country who's sitting down wondering why it is when I earn absolutely no income, rental or otherwise, from that property, that I am being assessed for what that property could be rented for, and a tax is being imposed on me. And that is just the reality facing the vast majority of citizens in this country. And that is what the question is here today. Property tax is a regressive form of taxation. And that is quite simply, it is something that I have explained before, and it is something, and it is the reason I am opposed to regressive forms of taxation, because it has no connection to the income earning capacity of the individual who has to pay it. And what that simply means is this: if I earn $30,000 a month and I purchase a $2 million property, I will pay the same amount of taxes as a person who inherited a property that their parents bought in 1979 on the Southern Main Road in Cunupia, which is now valued at $2 million, but that person lost their job in the refinery that the P&M closed down and cannot restart up to today. And when they come here and throw around words like we try to have a fairer system and a more equitable system of taxation, equity is not that you collect the same amount of money from people because of what they could rent a property for. Equity is about looking at what people can afford. Equity and what you can afford has absolutely no connection to what your property that you live in could be rented for. If this government was concerned about equity and fair collection of taxes, you know what they would do? They would go after all those multi-story apartment buildings going up all over the country where people collecting rent in cash and not paying taxes to the Board of Inland Revenue. Yeah. That would be equitable. I could understand the logic behind that. But we have a tax collecting system that is like a strainer where everybody can actually rent properties and actually collect rents and not pay any tax on that rent that they are collecting. But you're coming to tell me if you were to rent the house that you are living in, this is how much you could rent it for and you must pay taxes on that. So I am very much opposed in general to this system of annual rental value and how they propose to collect the taxes. But more than that, Mr. Vice President, I have to say that apart from not collecting tax, you know what the People's Partnership Government never did and what we will never do? We will never send a host of unqualified people to stand up and conduct curbside valuations. I received a notice of valuation, and I will speak as well about what I have received in my mailbox. And my notice of valuation said that the valuation exercise was conducted based on, and they cited a deed number. And the deed number that is cited is not even the deed where I bought the property. It is where the person who I bought it from bought the property. Right? So they conducted a valuation by looking at a deed. Okay, so that's the first thing. When I purchased my property, like everybody else in Trinidad and Tobago who purchases property, and you go to get your deed stamped at the Board of Inland Revenue, you know what you have to carry? You have to carry a valuation report that you pay for. But it must be, and Inland Revenue will not accept your valuation report unless it is from an RICS chartered valuator. So Inland Revenue will not accept a valuation for stamp duty purposes from someone unless they are properly qualified and certified. But they are accepting all these fly-by-night valuations from people with no qualifications hired by Valuations Division as field assessors. The minister must come here today and tell us what are the qualifications of the persons who conducted these valuations. Because Inland Revenue cannot impose a higher standard on the citizen who is simply trying to conduct business with the state and register their property deed, but they are willing to accept less from a similar government ministry under the same ministry from Valuations Division and say, well, okay, if you stand up outside or you go and you read the deed and you conduct a valuation, that is acceptable. Well, then do the same thing when it comes time to collect stamp duty. Do not force citizens to pay a percentage of the value of the property at certain private valuators just to get your deed stamped when you want to buy something or when you have to take your mortgage. But you could just come up with a valuation and then you have to go and use that now to pay taxes. We have also, I would say this, anytime you pass a law, one of the things that we always look at in this parliament and in every parliament, because that is why you have it there and it's an integral part of every piece of legislation where you are making some sort of imposition on the citizens of the country, you look at the protections that are afforded. And this government has completely failed in its mandate and what they were given the authority by Parliament to do in 2009 and even thereafter to offer those protections to the citizens. How could you start giving out valuations to people and you do not even have the tribunal that you put in place in the legislation? You do not have the tribunal set up to listen to the objections. You have a system in this bill, in this law, Mr. Vice President. Now, initially it was the Tax Appeal Board. They came here and they decided to change it from the Tax Appeal Board, which is a functional body that listens to objections for corporate tax, for income tax. That's what they're there for. That's what they've been doing forever. and, you know, they have the competence, they have the capability and all of that. And they came to this parliament in 2018 and replaced that tax appeal board with this valuations tribunal, a lawyer and 4 other people or something like that, who must sit down and listen to the objections when you disagree. So your first line of defense is to object to the same commissioner of valuations who tell you that this is evaluation. I don't even know what sense that makes, but you have to state the grounds, and there are 4 limited grounds upon which you can object. Okay, fine. So that's the first layer. The second layer now is that you must go to this valuations tribunal. It have none. And you know what is even more glaring as unfair in this legislation? You have a specified period of time in which you must file these objections, but there is no time frame in which they must respond to you. So you can file your objection to Valuation Division. The minister, I think earlier this month, passed an order under the Valuations Land Act, I think, yes, Legal Notice 52, saying that you can extend the time now to up to 6 months to file the objection. But giving people 6 months to file the objection and they had to wait 6 years for a response makes no sense. And they have to pay the tax. And I'll get to that just now, that they have to pay the tax. Why don't you set a time frame within which all objections must be dealt with? If you want to come here and preach equity, set a time frame. And those are the amendments that if you were listening to the people of this country, because people since 2009, they're quarreling and lamenting about this property tax. People are beyond that now, you know. People are on the issue of the fairness of the valuation and the fairness of the process. So, because the people of this country are so fed up of being beaten up by the PNM and beaten down, that they are saying, now, well, all right, we go pay the tax, but at least make it fair now. That's what they are saying, you know. We will pay the tax, but make it fair. Make the valuation fair. Make the objection process fair. Because what the law provides for is that even if you have an objection pending, you must still come and pay the tax. And if you don't pay the tax, interest and penalties are running on the taxes. So the citizens of this country have until the 30th of September, those who receive their assessment notices, to pay a tax. And whether they have filed objections with Valuation Division and are waiting, whether they have an issue with so a lot of people have come to me and I've been assisting them with filing their objection, even with Board of Inland Revenue, because the description of the property, PIN numbers, they get in more than one assessment, different assessments, some high, some low, for the same property. All of those things, you have to go now to the Board of Inland Revenue. You know, they love to preach digitalization, but there's an online form for the objection. If you click on it, it doesn't work. So they have to come to Port of Spain. That's another thing. You cannot even go to a district revenue office in your district where you live. They cannot, people in San Fernando cannot go to County Victoria District Revenue Office and file the objection. No, they have to come to Port of Spain, to objection section, to file the objection. And no form available online for them to be able to do that. So this is what the citizens continue to face while this government talk about collecting tax to deliver services. Again, as I have to say, delusional. It is clearly delusional. So let's talk about what they have proposed in this particular amendment that they have brought here today. They want the power to extend the time for them to deliver the notices of assessment. Now, several people would have received the valuation notices from the Valuations Division but have not yet received the assessment notice. And you cannot pay the tax unless you get the assessment notice. And the deadline for payment of the tax has not moved. But the government is giving themselves more time to deliver that assessment notice via the post to you. Because they can't get their house in order, they cannot complete the administrative side of collecting the tax, but they are shortening the time frame between when you get your notice and when you must pay the tax. How could that be fair? How could that be right? If you are extending the time by which the notices must be delivered to citizens of this country, you must extend the time for the payment of the tax as well. Cannot simply say, well, some people get their notice in March, some people will get their notice in February, some people will have get their notice now coming down the road in May, and some will get it on the 30th of June, and all of you must find yourself at the tax office and pay the tax on or before the 30th of September or face interest and penalties. That is not fair. The government must treat fairly with citizens. As oppressive as this tax may be, if you insist on imposing it to people, at least try to be fair. Try it. You might like it. It might save you. But, if you want to file, if you require an extension of time for the filing of the objection with the evaluation tribunal, it is only the notice of appeal. It is only the tribunal that could extend the time for you, but there is no tribunal in place. All of these things are issues affecting the fairness of this process. Mr. Vice President, the second part of this amendment that they are seeking to bring here today is that if anything is required to be done within a fixed time under the Act cannot be so done, the minister may by order from time to time appoint a later time to be doing so. So again, like Caesar, the minister will order a dispensation and say, okay, we will give ourselves more time to do this and we will give ourselves more time to do that. But why don't you permit more time? You must have consequential extensions of time for the citizens to be able to do what it is they have to do. So, and validating themselves. And that's, they come here regularly now, to validate things that they have done wrong and when they cannot meet their own timelines and so on, and they're always doing that. So that's what this Part B of Clause 2 seeks to really do. And then in Clause C of, Part C of Clause 2, they come to this affirmative and negative resolution. Mr. Vice President, for the benefit of those who don't know, perhaps here and the citizens out there, when something is subject to negative resolution, it takes effect before the ink that the minister signed the order with could dry on the order. It takes effect immediately. How can a government justify, when it comes to matters of taxation, the rate of taxation, and other issues affecting how you are going to tax people, believe that without any parliamentary oversight, they can implement something? And I've heard the argument many times before when we come here and talk about affirmative and negative, and I think Senator Thompson, he talks about the removal of that power of the parliament and legislative power of the parliament and the transference of that power to the executive by way of this negative resolution and affirmative and not coming for affirmative resolution. And she's correct. She's quite correct in that regard, because what this does is it gives the minister by himself, sitting in his office, lawmaking power. And they will argue that, well, the opposition has the opportunity to file a motion to annul. But for up to 40 days, because those, even if you file the motion on the same day that the order takes effect and is gazetted, you have to wait up to 40 days for a debate to happen in the parliament. And what happens in those cases? The government use their majority to vote down the resolution in many cases. To vote down the motion. So, Mr. Vice President, I can't see how a government that comes to talk about trying to have a system that has more equity in it and so on can arrogate unto themselves the lawmaking power to adjust things that affect taxation. This is not a simple adjustment like you are, changing some small change in legislation. This is serious legislation dealing with the imposition of taxes, and nothing should be done under these laws by way of negative resolution. It must remain affirmative. And any person who believes in the sovereignty of Parliament and who believes in democracy and who believes in the separation of powers will vote against this provision in this particular piece of law. Anyone who believes in those things. And the minister has offered absolutely no justification for wanting to make this change. I don't know if it's just laziness to come to the parliament every time that they want to make an amendment. Well, if you're too lazy, then pack up and go home. The Prime Minister has already said, all of you. The Prime Minister has already said that he is prepared to go on property tax. Well, go. Go. Because it seems that, and I think that's what's causing some of the delusions on this side, that they're talking about things that coulda, woulda, shoulda happened that never happened and relying on that to base their arguments, because all of them realize, the captain jumping off the ship and all of them going down sinking, right? And that's why they come in here and talking about something that never happened as though it happened. That's what's causing the delusion, right? Because they're scared now. But the fact is that if you are too lazy to come to the parliament, to deal with serious matters of taxation, then you do not belong here.
Yes.
As somebody once said, here is not the place for you. Because if you tell me that you want to make an amendment to a piece of legislation that affects the lives and livelihoods of the people of this country and will change the way that taxes are imposed upon them, I will come out my bed just as I came out today, and I will come here and meet you and debate you.
Yes.
And all of us will.
Fantastic.
And if you all don't want to do that, well then go home, because you cannot simply utilize your powers of majority in this parliament to remove that oversight of this parliament to come here now and to make these things by negative resolution. We will not allow it. And we will stand vehemently opposed to any such change that will be brought about. Mr. Vice President, I've heard, and I want to respond now to some of the arguments raised about foreign countries and so on. And I also want to respond because I heard everyone scoffing and, oh my God, and where is this coming from when Senator Mark talked about the consequences to people not paying their property tax and the powers of the Board of Inland Revenue. Apparently, some of them have not read the Property Tax Act that they are so in support of. But there is the power to distrain, and if the tax remains not paid after 5 years, the government can seize your property. And I want to tie that in very much with something that has been touted about by the government as well, with that if you are experiencing hardship, well, you know what you could do? You can ask for a deferral, and a lot of the pensioners and everybody, you could ask for a deferral and all of that. Now, there are two issues that I want to raise here. Firstly, when everyone was scoffing at what Senator Mark said, I recently saw an interview by a person by the name of Ms. Gillian Wolfe of the Revenue Authority. And Ms. Wolfe gave this interview on television and explained exactly what the power to distrain meant. And she said anything that is not attached to the property, they could come and pick it up and go and sell it in order to pay the outstanding taxes. So when people on this side are sitting here and scoffing at Senator Mark, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, and what is that, and they're pretending not to know, the citizens of the country deserve to know that even with an objection pending before Valuations Division, if they cannot afford to pay, the Board of Inland Revenue or the Revenue Authority or whichever incarnation that is in place has the power to come and pick up your bed and your fridge and your stove to satisfy the tax. And from the 30th of September, you will have interest and penalties running on it. Do you know that when you have a matter before the Tax Appeal Board, if you contest the amount of income tax or corporation tax that is levied upon you, and you contest it and you have an appeal before that particular tribunal that is actually set up and functioning in the law, there is a stop on the calculation of interest. They stop it. So when the big corporations who have been given the power to go before a functional tax appeal board want to contest the amount of taxes they have to pay, interest stops accruing. Interest does not accrue. Where are those protections for the citizens who you coming into their house? Where are those protections? None. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No time frame for the Commissioner of Valuations to respond to you. No valuation tribunal to go and appeal the decision when you do get it, if you get it. No stoppage on the calculation of interest for the poor citizens of this country whose board house in Panko Lane in San Fernando getting valued at $8,000 rental a month. No relief for them whatsoever from this uncaring government.
Diabolical government.
And the power of the state to sell your property if taxes remain unpaid for 5 years is there in the legislation. So don't pretend like you do not know that it exists. It exists. And it exists. So don't try to fool the population. If you were concerned so much about the making this thing fairer, it wouldn't be that you come here today to mama-guide the population about a reduction from 3% to 2%. What you would do is that you would have scrapped that entire process. You would have mash breaks. You would have mash breaks on the collection of the taxes, and you would have allowed everyone who wants to file an objection to have their objection heard and determined within a specified period of time. You would have brought amendments to the legislation that would say that the tax does not have to be paid until the objection process is completed. You would have brought provisions that would say that at a minimum, the interest and penalties would not run when you have an objection pending. Mr. Vice President, to make somebody pay their tax or to have interest and penalties running on the tax while you have an objection pending is like putting a noose around a man's neck while he still has his appeal against the death penalty pending. And that is what this is for many people. It is like the death penalty. Because there are people who simply cannot afford it on the basis of the valuation process that was fraught with irregularities. So knowing that you have allowed the rollout of a process without any process, and that has been so unfair. The entire concept of annual rental value is unfair. But apart from that, even in implementing that, there has been unfairness. You should stop it immediately. Immediately. And I want to tell them something, and I want to make that promise to this government here today. The day this government takes steps to utilize the power to distrain or the power to seize anybody's property while they have an objection pending, I will see you in court. I will see you in court. I met you once in 2017. I met you once in 2017 when you tried to amend the form that would require people to provide information that they were not required by law to do. And I stopped you in your tracks. Right? In 2017, we stopped you in your tracks. We did.
Yes.
Good. The Court of Appeal said you violated people's rights to privacy. Violating people's constitutional rights. The Court of Appeal said so. We went to the High Court in the dead of night and we got an injunction. We got an injunction in place and we stopped you. We forced you to have to come back here now and fix it, and you have come here and you have made all sorts of amendments and so on. But what you have done, and you will be judged by the population for what you have done when you go to their homes to collect their taxes. You have no right when an objection is pending to utilize any of the powers of enforcement contained in that Property Tax Act. Absolutely none. And then you want to come here and talk about what other countries doing and everybody pays taxes and so on. You know, I like how this government really, you do a lot of selective research, because a simple Google search, if you look at what pertains in other jurisdictions, will show you not just how taxes are collected and how they calculate and their methods and so on, but it will also show you the level of accountability and transparency. So go to any of the council, in the United Kingdom it's called council tax. Go to any one of those councils and look at how they give a breakdown of how they are calculating council tax. Council taxes are based first to begin with in the United Kingdom on what properties would have, they have bans in place. And they look at the value of your property as far back as right now 1991. If it is a new property and a newly constructed property, you must make an application to decide which band you fall into, etc., etc. But the particular council that you belong to, and I'm looking here at the Newcastle City Council, and I thought that, you know, everybody, and I hope that everybody in this country go and just use Google and look at any developed country that really, you know, can say that, look, we are utilizing your taxes for the good of your community. Because that's what the PNM have come here to try to convince people of, that they are collecting this tax to be utilized. This is an 18-page document, the last one for 2024-2025, but every single year, the councils which collect taxes in the United Kingdom publish documents like this. They show how the taxes collected will be divided between education, social care, public health, highways and transport, environmental and regulatory services, housing services, cultural and related services, planning and development services, central and other services. And they give you something like income and expenditure statement.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
Sure. Showing you how there is a breakdown of what is collected, what they plan to spend, where it will be spent, etc. Where is that level of transparency? The government thinks that they could come here and say, well, don't worry, we're giving it to the regional corporations, and that will somehow add to some level of transparency in expenditure. What is the last date that we have seen audited financials for all of the corporations in this country? I want to say again, not 1 cent of property tax should be collected and given to any corporation until they become up to date with all of the audited financials. Because we must know the level of accountability. Do you know that there has been an outstanding feud between the Auditor General's Department and the Board of Inland Revenue? It was widely reported in the newspaper. For years, they begged the former Attorney General to go to court on an interpretation summons, the Auditor General's Department, that is, and to see if whether or not they were entitled to certain information so that they can audit the revenue collected by the Board of Inland Revenue. He never did it for the 7 years that he was Attorney General. He never did it. The current Attorney General, and I hope that he speaks in this debate and gives us an update on that litigation that the Auditor General has requested of his department. Because if the Auditor General's Department cannot even look at the money being collected by the Board of Inland Revenue, they should not get 1 cent, not 1 extra cent from anybody in this country, particularly when it comes on the basis of what I decided to own. Mr. Vice President, nobody in this country should be forced to pay more tax because they put up a high fence and a high wall to protect themselves because the government has failed to protect them and has failed in the fight against crime. Nobody should have to pay more taxes because during COVID they were confined to their homes and the children had to do online classes, and so they invested in more technology or they invested in air conditioning their house. Those are the kinds of things that they have looked at. But you know something, that when you go to do a valuation report by a private valuator that they look at, and what increases the value of your home, your access to transportation, the condition of the roads leading to your home, the types of schools you have in your area, the amount of water that you get delivered. If water was a criteria for where I live, I would pay 0 property tax. None. Sunday morning, I paid $700 to get 1 tank of water because if WASA decides to send water, if and when they decide to send water, the pressure is so low in parts of San Fernando. San Fernando is hills. If you happen to live on top of one of the hills, you ain't getting no water. So if access to water, a basic fundamental human right, was to be included in anybody's valuation, nobody in this country should have to pay property tax. Not 1 single person. And so until this government can increase the level of services they deliver, until they could have a proper system for assessing taxes, a proper system of objecting and raising objections to taxes, and a proper system of transparency and accountability in the expenditure of the taxes, we say no taxes, none whatsoever should be collected from the citizens of this country. I thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant.